All right, so let's dive into this whole mess with Trump and Zelensky and rare earths.
Yeah, what a debacle that press conference was.
I mean, seriously, they were practically at each other's throats over this supposed deal. Ukraine giving the U.S. access to all these rare earths and critical minerals, and we'd give them military support in return.
Right, it sounded like a pretty sweet deal at first glance,
Hmm.
especially with all the talk about how crucial these rare earths are for, pretty much every aspect of our modern lives.
Totally. And I mean, even Secretary of State Marco Rubio was sounding the alarm, saying that if we don't get our act together, China could control basically everything we depend on in like less than 10 years.
10 years, that's not a lot of time.
No, it's not. And it really makes you wonder, was this whole deal actually about securing rare earths, or was there, something else going on behind the scenes?
That's what we're here to unpack. And, right off the bat, one of the things that really stood out to me was that there actually aren't any economically viable rare earth deposits in Ukraine, at least according to Eric Johnson, a senior geologist at the Geological Survey of Sweden.
Wait a minute. So you're telling me the whole premise of this deal was flawed from the start?
It really seems that way, and it gets even more interesting when you consider where these so-called deposits are located.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Fill me in.
Well, most of them are smack dab in the middle of territory controlled by Russia. So even if the deposits were actually there, it's not like we could just waltz in and start mining.
So we've got potentially non-existent deposits in a war zone, and this was supposed to be our big solution.
It's a head-scratcher for sure. And here's another wrinkle. The only data we have about these supposed deposits is from Soviet-era surveys done way back in the 1960s.
Ah, the good old days when accuracy and reliability weren't exactly top priorities.
Not exactly the kind of data you'd want to base a major geopolitical deal on.
So this whole thing is starting to sound like a house of cards built on shaky ground.
It really is. And here's another layer of complexity. Even if these deposits were miraculously accessible and full of high-quality rare earths, the dominant mineral there is brittlite.
Britholite? I'm not familiar with that one. Is that like a new type of smoothie?
Yeah, quite. It's a rare earth mineral. But the problem is no one has really figured out an efficient way to process brittlite to extract the rare earths we need.
So it's like having a treasure chest full of gold, but you lost the key.
A perfect analogy, Jack Lifton, the executive chairman of the Critical Minerals Institute, called the whole Ukraine rare earths idea a fantasy. He said, and I quote, "If you want critical minerals, Ukraine ain't the place to look for them."
Okay, so that's a pretty blunt assessment from a guy who really knows his stuff. It sounds like this deal was dead on arrival, so what was the point?
Well, even if everything went perfectly readily available, high-quality deposits, no war, a clear understanding of how to process them, building a functional rare earth mine takes at least 15 years.
15 years? I mean, some people can't even commit to a Netflix subscription for that long.
You're telling me, and let's not forget the financial and bureaucratic hurdles we're talking about. Rio Tinto Group, a massive mining company, has poured billions into potential mines in the U.S., and they're still waiting on permits to start digging out. Imagine trying to navigate that in a war-torn country like Ukraine.
It's mind-boggling, honestly. It's like someone pitched this whole thing without even doing the basic research.
It does make you wonder what Trump was really after, because getting rare earths from Ukraine in any kind of timely or cost-effective manner seems highly improbable, to put it mildly.
So maybe not a complete fantasy, but definitely bordering on the realm of the absurd. And this is where things get even more intriguing. Remember a few years back when Trump expressed interest in buying Greenland?
Ah, yes, the strategic real estate deal approach to international relations.
Exactly. And wouldn't you know, Greenland actually has substantial rare earth reserves?
Now that's interesting. Do you think he was trying to create some leverage with that Ukraine proposal? Like, look, I'm willing to make ludicrous deals for rare earths, so maybe you'll consider selling me Greenland.
It's definitely a theory worth considering, but even if that were the case, mining in Greenland presents its own set of obstacles. You've got extreme weather, muddy conditions during the spring thaw, the remoteness of the location. It's a logistical nightmare,
So even his plan B was far from ideal.
to say the least, which brings us to a question that's been bugging me this whole time. If the U.S. is so concerned about securing rare earth supplies, why not focus on working with allies who already have established mining operations? It seems like a more logical approach than stirring up geopolitical tensions.
Yeah. You would think so. Right, but the Biden administration was trying to do just that, working with countries like Australia and Germany to secure rare earths. But Trump's America First policies and his love of tariffs really damaged those relationships. It's almost as if he was deliberately trying to sabotage any chance of international cooperation on this issue. Melissa Sanderson, a board member of the mining exploration company American Rare Earths, has been very vocal about the need for collaborative efforts in the industry. She emphasizes that the current administration's approach, which prioritizes isolationism and confrontation, is counterproductive to say the least.
It's like he's playing chess, but instead of strategically maneuvering his pieces, he's just knocking them over.
A fitting analogy,
Yeah.
and here's the biggest irony of all: the United States actually has significant rare earth deposits of its own. We've got them in California, Alaska, Wyoming, all over the place.
Hold on, are you serious? We're scrambling to get rare earths from war-torn countries and icy wastelands when we have them right here at home. This is getting more perplexing by the minute.
It does raise a lot of questions, doesn't it?
Eh.
It was the Ukraine deal a genuine attempt to secure rare earths, or was it something else entirely?
So, maybe not a fantasy, but definitely a head scratcher. But here's what's really sticking with me. This whole situation is way more complicated than it appeared at first glance, and it definitely raises more questions than answers.
A lot of questions, yeah. And perhaps one of the biggest is, why are we so fixated on getting rare earths from other countries when we have them right here in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a great point. But before we go down that rabbit hole, I think it's worth taking a step back and talking about, why rare earths are so important in the first place. I mean, most people probably couldn't even name one, let alone explain why they're causing such a geopolitical stir.
You're right. The name itself is actually kind of misleading. They're not really all that rare. It's more about, how they occur in nature. They're scattered throughout the Earth's crust, which makes it difficult and expensive to mine them. But the thing is, they have these unique properties that make them essential for all sorts of modern technologies.
Okay, so what kind of technologies are we talking about? Give me some examples.
Well, think smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, even advanced weapon systems. Rare earths are used in everything from the tiny magnets in your headphones to the guidance systems in missiles.
Wow. Okay, so they're not just some obscure element on the periodic table. They're a critical component of like our entire modern world.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole situation so significant. China has had a near monopoly on rare earth production for decades. They control something like 80% of the global supply, which puts the U.S. in a pretty vulnerable position, especially with the way things are going between us and China right now.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. It sounds like we've kind of backed ourselves into a corner. We need rare earths. We don't want to rely on China, but we've also made it pretty difficult to work with other countries.
It's definitely a tricky situation, and it highlights the need for a more, nuanced and strategic approach to rare earths, one that balances economic interests with environmental concerns and geopolitical realities.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, for starters, I think we need to get serious about boosting domestic production. Yes, there are environmental challenges associated with mining rare earths, but those can be mitigated with, proper regulations and investments in cleaner technologies.
I can already hear the pushback from environmental groups. Mining is inherently disruptive no matter how you try to spin it.
There's no denying that, but the environmental cost of doing nothing could be even greater if we keep relying on China for rare earths. We have zero control over their environmental practices. At least if we're mining them here, we can hold ourselves accountable to higher standards.
That's a good point. So domestic production is one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
What else needs to be part of this strategic approach?
We also need to invest heavily in recycling existing rare earths. When we think about all the old electronics that are just sitting in landfills, there's a potential gold mine of rare earths just waiting to be recovered.
Yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing more of that already?
It's not quite as simple as it sounds. Recycling rare earths is complex and expensive, mainly because they're used in such small amounts and mixed with other materials. But it's definitely an area where there's a lot of room for innovation.
So it's a technological challenge as much as anything else. What about finding alternatives to rare earths altogether? Is that even a possibility?
Absolutely. Scientists are researching new materials that could do the same things as rare earths, but without all the geopolitical baggage. It's a long-term solution, but potentially a game changer if we can figure it out.
So we've got these three prongs: domestic production, recycling, and developing alternatives. But it sounds like it's not an either-or situation. We need all three working together to really address this problem.
It's all about diversification, reducing our reliance on any one source and constantly looking for more sustainable solutions. But there's another piece to this puzzle that we haven't talked about yet: international collaboration.
Right, and that's a tough one considering the current administration's America First approach, which hasn't exactly been a shining example of teamwork on the global stage.
Yeah, it's true, but that doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of common ground here. Every country wants a reliable supply of rare earths,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to be dependent on China. That shared concern could be a good starting point for building stronger partnerships.
So maybe there's a way to find common ground, even if it means putting aside some of the political drama.
I think so. At the end of the day, this issue is bigger than just rare earths. It's about global security, economic stability, and the future of the planet. If we can't cooperate on something this important, what hope do we have for tackling even bigger challenges down the road?
It's a bit sobering when you put it like that, but also a good reminder that this isn't just about winning some geopolitical game. It's about making sure everyone has a sustainable future.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for people to understand how complex this issue really is. We need informed citizens who can hold their leaders accountable and demand solutions that are good for the whole world, not just a select few.
Well said. So we started this deep dive talking about that crazy proposed deal with Ukraine, and now we're exploring all of these different challenges and potential solutions related to rare earths.
It's been quite a journey, and I hope our listeners are starting to understand just how important these elements are and how much they impact our lives.
I hope so too. And for anyone listening, remember, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep learning, stay curious, and most importantly, don't be afraid to ask the tough questions.
Because the future depends on it.
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to explore some of the potential solutions to this rare earth conundrum. Are we doomed to be at the mercy of China, or is there a way to break free? We'll tackle those questions right after this. All right, so we're back, and before the break, we were talking about all these different options for dealing with this rare earth situation, boosting domestic production, recycling, finding alternatives, but it seems like there's no easy answer.
No, not really. I mean, take domestic production, for example. We know the U.S. has these deposits, but actually mining them comes with a whole host of environmental issues. Habitat disruption, potential water contamination, what to do with the waste. It's a lot to consider.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, people want the latest gadgets and all the benefits of green technology, but they don't always want to think about the not so pretty side of how those things are made.
The classic, not in my backyard dilemma, but,
Yeah.
ignoring it doesn't make it go away. We need stricter environmental regulations for sure, but also more investment in cleaner mining technologies. There are some really interesting approaches being developed, like using microorganisms to extract minerals or using less toxic chemicals in the process.
So it's not just a matter of digging a big hole and hoping for the best.
Not at all.
Mm.
We need to be smarter about how we do this, and that's where technology comes in. Robotics, AI systems that can optimize extraction and reduce waste. That's where we can make a real difference.
So it's about working smarter, not harder. What about recycling? We talked about how it's not as simple as just, tossing our old phones in a bin. What are the main challenges there?
It boils down to the fact that rare earths are often used in tiny amounts, and they're mixed in with other materials, so separating them out efficiently and in a way that makes economic sense.
Mm.
That's the hard part. It's expensive, and it requires some pretty advanced technology, but again, there's a lot of potential for innovation in this area.
So maybe someday we'll have special rare earth recycling bins right alongside our paper and plastic ones. The guy can dream, right? And what about the idea of just, finding alternatives altogether, materials that can do the same job as rare earths, but without all the geopolitical drama?
That's a huge area of research right now. Scientists are experimenting with all kinds of materials trying to mimic the unique properties of rare earths. It's definitely a long-term solution, but it could be a total game changer if we can crack the code.
So we've got these three main options: domestic production, recycling, and finding alternatives. But it sounds like we need all three working together to really make a dent in this problem.
Exactly. It's all about diversification.
Yeah.
Not putting all our eggs in one basket and always searching for more sustainable ways of doing things. But there's another important aspect that we haven't really talked about yet, and that's international collaboration.
Right, and that's a tricky one given the whole America First approach that's been so dominant lately. It hasn't exactly fostered a sense of global teamwork.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, every country wants a steady supply of rare earths, and nobody wants to be at the mercy of China. The shared concern could be a good foundation for building stronger partnerships.
So maybe there's hope for some common ground, even if it means toning down some of the political rhetoric.
I think so, because this goes beyond just rare earths. It's about global security and economic stability and the future of the planet. If we can't find a way to work together on this, what hope do we have for tackling even bigger challenges down the line?
It's a pretty sobering thought, but it's a good reminder that this isn't just about, winning some kind of geopolitical game. It's about making sure everyone has a chance at a sustainable future.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so crucial for people to understand just how complex this issue is. We need informed citizens who can hold their leaders accountable and push for solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
Well said. So we started this deep dive trying to make sense of that proposed Ukraine deal, and now we've gone down this rabbit hole of rare earth challenges and potential solutions.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope our listeners have gained a better understanding of how vital these elements are and how much they impact our lives.
Me too. And to everyone listening out there, remember this conversation doesn't end here.
Huh?
Keep learning, stay curious, and most importantly, don't be afraid to ask the tough questions.
Because ultimately the future depends on it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, stay curious.